After spending more than 20 years living overseas in 8 different countries, I returned to the United States 2 years ago, only to find a country I barely recognized. Now, as I set my sights on my next destination, I want to share what I learned as an expat over the years, both the challenges and the rewards, so that if you're thinking about making a move, you'll have the knowledge and confidence to do it. In this first video, I'll share why I left the United States in the first place, why I came back, and why I'm already planning to leave again. This channel is for anyone considering a move abroad, but I'll be focusing especially on those who may not have a big savings account, a 401k, or a company pension. People like me who are going to have to rely on Social Security or work for the rest of our lives. Hi, I'm Basha, and I recently came back to the United States after 20 years abroad, and I'm already planning to leave again. Why did I leave? Well, my reasons back then were very different from what they are now. Back then, things like politics, economics, crime, and other considerations didn't even enter into the picture. I wasn't running away from anything, but running towards a great adventure. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that even though there may be plenty of things that we're more than happy to leave behind, it's very important to be going towards something with a positive attitude, seeking out a way to carve a lifestyle that's more in tune with who we are, our values, and the things that we like to do in life. So like I said before, I was looking for adventure, and my thirst for adventure started at a very young age. My first grade teacher started teaching us words and phrases in French, and that really ignited a spark in me. So I jumped on the bandwagon and I took Spanish all the way through high school, college, and beyond. And I understand that not all of you are going to have those kind of language skills and maybe not even be interested in learning a second language. But I want to tell you that that may not be such a big obstacle to your living overseas as you might think. I mean, especially if you're coming from the United States, English has really become the international language. And I don't mean to imply that you're going to find English speakers in every place that you go to, not at all, especially not in the smaller villages and things. But in a lot of places, especially bigger cities or places that get a lot of tourists or where there's a lot of expats, you'll run into a lot of people that speak English, and pretty well at that, because people like to travel, and if they don't have a language in common, they usually default to English. So language was the first thing, and then my sense of adventure got sparked even more in third grade, when my third grade teacher, who traveled a lot during her summer vacations, used to show us slideshows from her travels. And that really sort of inspired and intrigued me, and I really developed a fascination with especially lesser developed and more exotic countries. And although I did travel somewhat during my 20s and early 30s to places like the Caribbean and Europe and things like that, it really wasn't a total immersion experience like I wanted. In fact, when I went to Germany, for example, that's another language that I learned along the way. Every time I spoke to somebody in German, they'd answer me back in English. So if you're worrying about English in Europe, I don't think you have to worry about it too much. So anyway, I just thought, man, if I were to be plunked down in a country where nobody spoke English and the way of life was completely different from anything that I was used to, could I do it? Would I be able to survive? Could I make my way around? Well, I finally got the opportunity to put all that to the test when I signed up for a 2-week Spanish language immersion course in Guatemala. And I don't mean like a big city in Guatemala. I did a homestay in a tiny indigenous village high in the Cuchumatan Mountains of Guatemala, like at least a 2-hour bus ride down tortuous mountain roads to the nearest thing that even resembled a city. And what I discovered there was, yes, I could do it. I didn't meet a single person who spoke English. I'm a big believer in immersion. I mean, if you know that you can rely on your own language, then you're going to, but when you can't, you find a way to communicate, even if you have to use sign language. And let me tell you something, a nice friendly smile and an openness is going to get you a lot further along than fluency in language, because you're going to connect more deeply with people. And that's really what it's all about, isn't it? So, you know, having had this experience in Guatemala, I learned so much more than just language there. I learned about an entirely different way of life. Basically, I was sharing a 2-room mud hut with a family of 6, and learning a lot, not only about the language and their way of life, but also about the socio-political landscape that they lived in. It was really an eye-opening experience for me. And having had that experience, I was really hungry for more. So 10 years later, I had the opportunity to sell my house in Denver and move to Mexico. And I stayed there for about 3.5 years, but for me, the wanderlust didn't really go away with just that one destination. So over the course of 20 years, I lived in Mexico, Thailand, Poland, the Czech Republic, Turkey, England, Scotland, and Spain. And then I had like a period of, I think, about 2 or 3 years where I was completely nomadic. I didn't have a fixed residence at all and just traveled around all the time. And if that is a kind of a lifestyle that appeals to you and you're wondering about how you can finance it, let me know in the comments, because I might do a separate video just on that if there's enough interest. I have some pretty good tips in that respect. So while I was nomadic, I spent a lot of time in the Netherlands, Finland, Germany, Italy, and traveled around to a lot of other European countries too. And I absolutely loved the lifestyle in Europe. So why did I come back? Well, nobody could have been more surprised than me. I fully expected to spend the rest of my life overseas. But world events like the pandemic and the war in the Ukraine kind of changed the situation. And I wouldn't say that I came back because of either one of those things, but they certainly influenced my decision-making process. When the pandemic struck, I was in Spain, so I just kind of hunkered down there, and that was a decision that was going to affect the rest of my life. We had a lockdown in Spain that was like nothing you would believe. For about 3.5 months, we were not allowed to leave our homes except to go to the grocery store, the pharmacy, or the hospital. That was it. And even to go to those places, you had to download this certificate from the internet that said where you were going, what time you were leaving, and I don't know if you had to put when you were getting back, but you weren't allowed to be out for very long. So I probably only went out grocery shopping about once every 10 days. And the thing was that I was traveling on a UK passport at the time. I have dual citizenship. And so I was allowed to be there for a long time. But, you know, Brexit had been declared several years before that. But we're in this withdrawal period where they kind of had clemency and you could still have the same freedom of movement that other EU citizens have. But that was all going to be coming to an end because this withdrawal period, or this sort of transition period, was coming to an end at the end of 2020, and at that time I would no longer be considered an EU citizen. So if I wanted to stay there, I would have to get legal residence. And here we were in the middle of lockdown, and I had no idea how long it was going to last, because at the beginning, they told us, okay, we're going to do this lockdown for 2 weeks to flatten the curve and everything will go back to normal, right? Wrong. So I thought I better establish my residency in Spain. And so I set the ball in motion to get my residency there. And boy, that was a trip, dealing with the Spanish bureaucracy in the middle of a pandemic when all of the government offices were shut down. My application actually got lost in the mail the first time. And I'll talk about that more in another video on getting residency and visas in the countries that I've lived in, and also the countries that I'm thinking about living in the future. So like I said, I basically became a Spanish resident by default, although it wasn't necessarily the country I wanted to end up in. And even though there was still time to go and explore living in another country after the lockdown ended, there were a couple of things holding me back. One of them was that after being locked down for so many months, I kind of developed a little bit of agoraphobia, kind of like the opposite of claustrophobia. You don't really feel like going out anymore. And I really wasn't ready to travel outside of Barcelona, much less jump on a plane and go to another country. And besides that, before the pandemic, I had been really involved in the improv community in Barcelona. Improv is like theater, but you make up the script as you go along. It can be comedy or drama. It's really fun. And I was doing that almost every day before the pandemic hit. And then I started doing it again as often as I could after the lockdown ended, and I wanted to keep doing it. So those were two things keeping me in Barcelona. And so I stayed for another couple of years or so, but eventually I really felt the need to get out of Spain. Because when you are resident in another country, of course, you're subject to their tax laws, which is reasonable. Here's the kicker. I was self-employed, and Spain is one of the most expensive countries to be self-employed in. And in addition to that, a lot of my friends had already left Spain at the beginning of the pandemic, and so my social landscape changed a lot. And those who were left behind really, once the lockdown was over, they wanted to go out and explore. They were traveling, they were climbing mountains, all kinds of stuff that I wasn't really prepared to do yet because of this sort of agoraphobia that I had developed. And so I was starting to feel a little lonely, and I wanted to change. So I started exploring the idea of moving to another European country, and I considered Netherlands, where I had a lot of friends, and Finland, Czech Republic, where I'd lived before. But there was this war going on in the Ukraine, and so the Czech Republic to me seemed a little bit too close to the action. It hadn't spread there, but I didn't know how far it was going to spread. And then the Netherlands and Finland, they're both really cold countries, and we had this looming energy crisis because the pipeline from Russia, where they had gotten pretty much all of their oil, most of it anyway, had been broken. And I'm thinking, well, we don't really use our heat in Barcelona, but we don't really need to. It doesn't get all that cold. But I thought, gosh, I'm not going to be able to pay a heating bill up there, so that probably wouldn't have been a good idea. So then I considered Turkey because I'd lived there before and I really liked it. The people are so friendly, and I had a lot of friends that could help me find a place to live, but I didn't want to go back to where I'd lived before. It was a small city, and after being cooped up in the pandemic for so long, I wanted to be closer to nature. And so I started having some friends help me check out, smaller areas with a lot of natural beauty in Turkey. And there are a lot of them. It's a gorgeous country. But none of my friends lived in those areas. And I don't know, I just didn't want to start from scratch again. So I kind of abandoned that idea. Meanwhile, I had an old boyfriend back in the States. And over the years, I'd been trying to get him to join me wherever I was living, and he'd been trying to get me to come back to the States, but it never really worked out because he started a business in the States, and then he got a dog, and then he started another business, and he got another dog, and so he was pretty tied down here. And there's the dog, if you can hear him. That's Wally. His name is Wally. So, faced with this kind of unusual situation where it seemed like nowhere I could go would be really acceptable to me at that time, by default, I came back to Kenny. I don't want to make it seem like your last choice, Poi, but so yeah, and it was a great decision. Once I made the decision, I really knew that I made the right choice. It felt right. We always got along great together, had a lot of fun, and that was also true when I came back. We just picked up right where we left off. And so why, you might ask, am I leaving again? Am I running from, or am I running to? Well, a little bit of both this time. And this time I'm not going alone. Kenny's going to come with me. But let's talk first about what we want to get away from. The major obstacles to me living in the United States for the rest of my life are, number one, the cost of living. I want to retire at some point in my life, and it costs a hell of a lot to live here. So I'm actually feeling kind of trapped here, even though some things have been very positive. Life with Kenny has been great. We get along as well as we always did. And yeah, his dog kind of treats me like the third leg, but that's okay. One of his dogs died a few years ago, by the way, so that's really sad. And that dog really liked me. But the main reason that staying here isn't even an option for us is the cost of living. I mean, I'm still in shock every time we go to the grocery stores, and I've been here for 2 years now. The other thing is that I really can't get around very well here. I haven't driven a car in over 20 years because everywhere I live, they had great public transportation, like everywhere, even to tiny villages. And here you have to drive everywhere you go, and where we live, there is no public transportation, except for there's like a little cab for the elderly, and I don't consider myself that elderly yet. And so I could get a driver's license again. I don't think it would be that hard, but I can't afford to buy even a used car. So that's one thing. So our life is pretty much circumscribed in this one square block neighborhood that we live in with 3 cul-de-sacs. And on the bright side, the neighbors are really, really friendly. And, you know, you can't go walk the dog without stopping and talking to people, and people have parties and get-togethers and stuff, so that is really nice. And it's probably the friendliest neighborhood I've ever lived in my entire life anywhere. So that was kind of a surprise because it certainly was not like that in other places I've lived in the United States. And then the next issue, of course, is food quality. In most of the places I've lived, they either don't allow GMOs at all, or, you know, they put really strict restrictions on them. But I was used to, well, because I don't eat meat, I did most of my shopping for fruits and vegetables in little independent fruit and vegetable shops or open air markets. And I very rarely went into a grocery store, you know, unless I needed olive oil or, you know, can of tomato sauce or something like that. So that's what I'm used to. And these huge mega supermarkets that we have here, they scare me. They really do. And then there's healthcare. My God, when I was in Spain, before I got my permanent residency there, I had to buy private health insurance. And for the full coverage that covered everything that's covered by their state health insurance, I paid about 100 euros a month. Covered everything. No copay, no, what else do you have besides copays? Yeah, no percentage. I mean, it just covered everything. No money out of pocket at all. And so when I first came here, healthcare wasn't the first thing on my mind, but I suddenly found myself facing an urgent medical situation right after I canceled my Spanish health insurance. So I couldn't even go back to Spain. And I went to some doctors here, and it was really clear that I was not going to get medical care unless I could cough up more money than I had. So I went to Argentina, and I had excellent health care for a fraction of the cost of what it would have been here, like 1/20th of the cost. 1/20th of the cost. Yes, 1/20th. And I had excellent care. The doctor never made me feel like I was taking up too much of his time. He was actually the owner of the medical center that I went to. And while I was there, I took advantage of all kinds of other healthcare issues. And it was great. Now I have Medicare, of course, because I've reached the age. But even then, I think if I had something major that wasn't an emergency, I might go back to Argentina, because that level of care is not something that I've seen here. So, you know, this private health care that we're so proud of isn't all it's cracked up to be. Wally! Aw. I thought he wanted to come say hi, but now he's just plopped himself down. The other issue, of course, is crime. I mean, it is so much worse here than anywhere else I've lived, or anywhere I've lived at the time I was living there. I think Mexico's worse now. But the things that I see, even in this, we live in a very small city, and there are murders, there are robberies, and in the next biggest city, it's really starting to fall apart. It just scares the heck out of me. I want to go to a place where I feel that I can walk around freely without, you know, reasonable fear of being attacked or murdered. Sorry to say it, but I'm scared to live here. And, you know, God forbid Kenny should die before me while we're living here, but it could happen because he's a lot older than me. You know, if I were not physically or financially able to relocate myself to another country at that time, like if we stayed here, I would be living on the streets. I would be living on the streets because I cannot afford to live here. So we're going to be looking to fix all of these problems geographically, and we'll share a discovery process with you as we go along. And maybe you'll have some input that'll help us as well, because we're dealing with a few obstacles now. First of all, there's Wally, our dog. We are not willing to leave him behind, obviously. If you're a pet owner, you know that's just not an option. And we don't want to put him on a plane. I put my 3 cats on planes twice in my life, and it was very traumatic for me and for them both times. And so I swore I would never do that again. And by the way, I spoke to somebody who worked for an airline once, you know, doing the loading of the cargo and everything. And he told me that about 10% of the pets that are put in the hold, they never make it. So whether it's from, you know, conditions or just fear or what, I just wouldn't do it again. And the other obstacle that I'm facing is convincing Kenny, my partner, that there's a world out there and it's not necessarily worse than this one. Things are different for sure in other countries, and the standard of living is going to be different. It may not be worse. It may actually be better. It's definitely going to be different. And one of the things that's going to be different is the sizes of the houses that people live in. Yeah, there are countries where you can live in a big house like you do in the United States, like most people do, I guess, in the United States. One thing I can say is that even though the standard of living might go down a little bit, the quality of life is almost sure to go up depending on where you go. And there are so many more things to quality of life than just having a big house to live in. Because if you're not spending all your time trying to make money, you actually have some time to relax and get to know people and explore the area that you're in. And for me, it's always a blast to explore a new place that I've just moved to. You know, other positive things about living other places are, for one thing, better social opportunities, because there's a lot less ageism in other countries. Not in every country, but in most of the countries I've lived in, my friends have ranged in age from early 20s to 80 and beyond. And I learned something from all of them. And I feel that my life has been so much richer because of it. Another advantage is fresh, non-GMO food. I have definitely noticed the difference in food quality since I've come back here. So I'm looking forward to getting someplace with a lot of good fresh fruit and veg that I can feel is safe for me. And then, of course, there's the amount of vegetarian and vegan restaurants, which, of course, I know there are cities and towns in the United States that have a lot of those options, but where I'm living right now, it's almost unheard of. It's very difficult to get that. And I have some other dietary restrictions too, so it's really hard to even go out and eat in a restaurant. So what I hope to offer you in this video series is a mix of my own past experiences and insights, as well as to open up a forum where you can ask your own questions, express your concerns, and share your own experiences too if you've lived overseas. I also will provide a comparison of life in the U.S. versus life in the countries I've lived in. And I might, if I can convince people to do it, interview some of my friends who live in other countries and both expats living overseas as well as natives from the various countries, so they can give you some insights into how they see life in various places. And we'd like to share with you what we learn as we research our next destination. And I hope to get Kenny on the camera too. He doesn't like to get on the camera, but maybe if you all drop a comment, you can convince him.
No way.
So my next video is going to be about how I decided where to live in the past and how I plan to do things differently this time. So if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification button so you don't miss a single video. And be sure to give us a thumbs up so that this video can get out to as many people as possible and we can start creating that community together. See you next time.